So The Last of Us Part 2 just happened, and that was controversial, to say the least. And before I make any videos discussing Last of Us Part 2, I want to explain what I want for Part 3, and more specifically, why I want a Part 3. Now, for this video, I'm going to be keeping my opinions on The Last of Us Part 2 to a minimum, because I actually want to make a few videos discussing it. Also, major spoilers for The Last of Us Part 2, so if you don't want to be spoiled, now's your chance. Like, I don't know why you're even watching this video, but yeah, get out of here. Now, the question that you're most likely asking me right now is, why do we need a Part 3 when Part 2, for the most part, just slapped a lot of fans in the face? And you're probably in the boat of, I don't want a Part 3 because I don't want to play as Abby, which, understandable, or I don't want a Part 3 because our Ellie's arc is finished. And my response to you is, I agree. I don't want any of these things either. As it stands, Ellie's arc is finished as she sets out onto the sunset after going through hell. And while you could argue that Abby has more story as she just reached the Fireflies, I don't think anyone wants a game as Abby, especially after what she did to Joel, because I'm sorry, Naughty Dog, the fan base still isn't for you on that one. I don't think anyone wants to play as Abby anymore. Of course, now there is the people asking, why do we need a Part 3? The game ended, she walked off into the sunset. Why do we need this now? Because there's a lot of people who were satisfied with Part 2 and don't want the franchise tarnished any more than it already has been. And I'm going to get back to that. But for now, let me discuss what I want for Part 3 of The Last of Us and why it's important now more than ever. So, because no one wants to play as Abby and Ellie's arc is finished, where would we go from there? And my answer to you is, and the reason my answer to that question is 20 years in the past, specifically right after Sarah dies in Joel's arms. I want to pick up directly from there, having the player relive one of gaming's most heart-wrenching moments and experience the loss of Joel's daughter for a second time, only this time, for the majority of the game, we are not going to be playing as Joel. This is where you probably look at me and go, what, are you crazy? Why go back to the time of Joel still being alive if we're not going to play as him? And that's because we're going to be playing as Tommy, but more on that in a bit. Now, if you're wondering why I want to go back to this time period specifically, is because this time period is alluded to a lot and mentioned by Tommy as being nightmarish. I want the player to experience what Tommy went through, and we get to see another side of Joel, and this will be hammered in, especially if we're playing as Tommy. During this period, we'll be able to see Joel from another person's perspective as the sympathetic monster he really is before his redemption in later games. But not only that, we'll be able to see a lot more into Tommy, and which is something that I've wanted a lot in other games. Like, there was times where I wanted to play as Tommy in The Last of Us Part 2. But hold on a minute, because Tommy is not going to be the only playable character in The Last of Us Part 3, because not only will we be able to play as Tommy, but we will also be able to play as secondary protagonist. Which begs the question, why Ellie's mom? And why two protagonists again? Why would we do this again when it just failed? Firstly, Ellie's mom, because a lot of fans thought Abby was Ellie's mom when she was first revealed in that trailer back in the day. And I have to argue that the only reason that Last of Us Part 2 quote-unquote failed in The Last of Us Part 2 is because everyone just flat out hated Abby because she killed Joel. And playing as her was a hard pill to swallow, to say the least. And Naughty Dog in the past has proved they're not afraid to have different player characters for certain moments in the Last of Us series. In the first game, you play as Sarah, Joel, and Ellie as various moments. In Part 2, you play as Joel, Ellie, and Abby. And for Part 3, you will play as Joel, Tommy, and Ellie's mom, which will not only expand on Tommy, it will also introduce us to Ellie's mom, while also expanding on the Fireflies and Joel's fall into a brutal survivor. Now, this will be the final part of the trilogy and closing the cycle of games, bringing the story full circle. But you might be asking, why can't we just have Ellie's mom know Joel and Tommy? And my answer to that is I'm not a big fan of fiction where they dive into the past and all these characters somehow knew each other. It's like, oh, I was actually good friends with your parents, but never actually said anything. So, like, playing as her is a good way to flesh out the world and the characters and the Firefly specifically. And you could argue that she could have met Tommy, which I agree is possible, since Marlene seemed to know about Tommy, and Marlene was very close to Ellie's mom. But part 3 could be a way to flesh out Joel in a new light, Tommy in a new light, and Ellie's mom, the world right after the outbreak, and other side characters we met in the first game like Tess and Bill. Which brings me to the final point of part 3, which is the length of its story, and more specifically, one time I would like to stress is how this game is told. I want this game to be told over the course of 20 years. Normally, The Last of Us is no stranger to using time as its chapters. In part 1, seasons were used. In part 2, days were used, like not including the flashbacks. And I want told this way because I want you to see the change the characters go through over time, specifically with Joel and Tommy more so. I want to see his reactions to Joel and his increasing brutalities. There could also be flashbacks of them growing up so we can see how they were as kids, and there's a lot to explore in this in their complex relationship, and we can see, you know, their love for each other as brothers. But remember, this isn't just Joel's story, it's also Tommy's and Ellie's mom's, but mostly Tommy's. I want to know more about these characters from the past. I want to see the world going into chaos. I want to see the Fireflies. I feel like a part 3 in this vein would get us back to form and leave off the series on a good note versus what we have now. Let's go back to the characters we love before finally going full circle and having part 3 end right before the first game starts with Joel going to sleep, putting the series to rest and ending peacefully. I, like a lot of you watching this video, loved The Last of Us and the first story it told. It was the game that showed me what stories and games could do, and for me, after part 2 and what it did for the fan base, needs a part 3, which is interesting to say because The Last of Us did not necessarily need a part 2 because it ended perfectly, but because of part 2, there needs to be a part 3, and we need to close off the series properly. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch this video. If you guys liked it, please give me a like and don't forget to sub. Please let me know if you guys want to see more videos like this, and I will see you guys on the next video. Thank you guys so much. See ya.